you're exploring the 2 sets to failure now. That's something that you're really diving in on. Yeah. So how's your experience been recovery wise? And also, why did you switch from, you were the full body guy. I need to go back to this for a second.
Yeah.
Because you preach this, you sold this full body thing, right? And now you've stepped away from it. But I can't imagine that you're not saying, oh, now everybody should step away from it. That was part of your journey for a very specific reason. So talk about it.
I'll say this. If the natty limit exists, you can reach it on a full body program. If I would continue with full body program, I'd be in a very similar position to where I'm at now. So a lot of it has to do with personal preference and quite honestly, the fact that I have a home gym. Because also I film everything, So you're constantly adjusting the lights and everything. It can be annoying doing giant sets in this little setup, alternating back and forth. And I just don't see the point when it's couple footsteps away. So that was a big reason for doing upper lower. And then the split stuff, hey, I get to change my outfit. I get to record that on YouTube. It looks better on a visual level instead of me wearing the same stuff in the same room on the same workout day, it just helps, including if you go to a gym. So diversity of content is actually a big reason. Like I said earlier, putting the viewers before me, but also to be psychologically fresh, try out different things, have fun, right? If anyone wants to get an elite physique, they can do so with full body training. That's what all the Silver Era guys did. And it's why I got into it in the first place, with Leroy Colbert and Steve Reeves being a strong inspiration of mine. What's changed really is not really the template itself, but more so how I view proximity to failure, right? They say you need 10 to 20 sets a week per muscle for optimal gains, and that 20 is probably better than 10. I don't really believe that's the case anymore. And I was also a big proponent of lower rest intervals to build your work capacity and get more volume in, therefore more growth, but with less fatigue and whatnot. And what I realized that it has the same effect. So if I do 3 sets of 10 with 3 to 5 minutes of rest versus 6 sets of 10 with 1 minute rest, the 3 sets will have the same hypertrophy response as the 6 sets, just that I did half the work. And you're not saving any time by doing the 6 sets because I'm doing less. And with the longer rest, it equalizes to a similar time frame. So that's something I corrected, and as a result, I started thinking like, what if I go even less than 3 sets? What about 2? And then I found guys online that were training that way, like Trained by JP, hypertrophy coach, Paul Carter, and a lot of the guys who are not like full on HIIT, but are close to it. They had some inspiration from it. Everything they said made sense to me. So I started experimenting in my own way, and it proved to be equally as effective. And that's what I want to point out. It's not superior. It's just equally as effective without doing extra. I like training hard. I like going to failure. I like having a higher proximity. And I just see it as, why not be efficient when you're training? So
from what you mentioned earlier, you said how rotating your tires, I like to call it that, because you're changing the angle up. You're adding, instead of doing 3-4 sets.
On that level, I would say it's superior. Well, look, if we're talking about muscle biasing, if I do 3 compound movements, different angle each, but same total volume by the end of the session, and I'm at that perfect amount, let's say 6 sets. I find 6 is that ideal sweet spot on a workout to workout basis. Like the net hypertrophy is going to be comparable, but with the biasing factored in, I think that's better for a bodybuilder.
Have you found 6 sets to be that sweet spot for you with the compound specifically, or also with some of the isolation stuff?
The isolation, you could even do 4, but the compound is definitely 6. So it's always 4 to 6 sets per workout. So I would say this, 72 to 96 hours of rest between strenuous sessions, 6 sets for the compounds per workout, 4 sets for the isolation per workout. That's it. This is for upper body and lower body, push, pull. It doesn't matter. That's the trend that I found to be effective.
You mentioned 72 to 96 hours between strenuous workouts. Let's break that down for a second, because you do have a split from what you talked about where sometimes you'll go in back to back. Are you talking about between the same body part being hit again?
Correct.
Okay.
Unless we're doing full body. And full body, you can probably get away with 72 just because there is no overlap. See, that's the problem. The overlap will mess you up. What I learned eventually is that if I do push-pull legs, right, on the leg day, my upper back might still be fried from the pull day. So I'll either have to just take the L and go through with it with a fatigued upper back, which can compromise my performance on some lifts, or I'm going to have to change the exercise selection on both days. What I mean is I will not be able to do barbell rows on a Tuesday if on Wednesday I have to do barbell back squats or deadlifts. Like in a perfect world, I would love it to be 72, but because there's overlap, man, like I feel that. And the problem is the stronger I get, the harder it is to recover. So this is the biggest reason why I've gravitated towards 96 in recent times. I've never trained like this up until recently. It's always been 72. Actually, when I started, it was 48. I would do full body every other day. And if I was really banged up, I'd do 72. And then it morphed into the twice a week full body, which would be like a Monday full body and then Thursday repeat. And that was the best recovery ever. And then I switched over to upper lower. 72 hours was good, but I would still noticed that on some sessions, I wasn't quite fully recovered because of that overlap. And that's why I started playing with the exercise selection to reduce some of those overlapping muscles, right? And then in recent times, it's gravitated to 96. What's up?
Well, because you were talking about the upper lower and you said there was some overlap. Is it because you were doing the deadlifts on the lower day?
Any non-chest supported row, even standing overhead press, anything that's axial loaded on both days, there's some overlap there. So you got to change what you're doing.
Gotcha.
And you feel it when you're strong. When you're not strong, you won't relate to what I'm saying, but you got to think of these things. Even Larson pressing, bro. Reducing leg drive on your bench can be helpful because you're arching less. You know, you're not pressing your legs that hard into the ground. Every minute thing like that affects your recovery.
This is interesting. This is where it gets fun because you're talking about that recovery aspect where even with the day of rest in between, I'm correct with that, right? Like where you would do your upper body day and then you would take a day of rest and then you go and you do your lower body day, but it was deadlifts. Do I have that sequence right?
No, I'm saying back to back. Yeah. That's when there's a problem.
Gotcha.
But if there is a day in between, my lower body day is going to be more productive unless I go to gym and I'm doing leg machines only. If I'm going to do a hack squat and a leg press, then it's fine that I went hard on barbell rows or standing overhead press on Monday. But because I like my free weighted movements, you have to adjust accordingly. So exercise selection, especially for home gym guys, this is where it becomes important. At the gym, you have a lot more wiggle room if you use a lot of machines and whatnot.
And also, I think rate of recovery on different muscle groups. Like say you did, well, it depends on how you split this up, but if you did like a stiff leg deadlift and your hamstrings are torched for like 4 or 5 days, and then you're going to go do legs, your second lower body day, if you're doing that upper lower 4 times a week, and you got to do squats or even leg press, and you feel that, like you legit feel that.
Well, that's why guys have a different, like a quad bias day or hamstring and glute focus day, just to prevent some of that. I would say twice a week is a general good sweet spot, no matter what the muscle is. What's going to affect it is how close you train to failure and also how strong you are. You know, we're not all equally strong on certain muscles, right? Like you can have an elite upper body and maybe an intermediate lower body. So just by design, you'll be able to do more frequency on your legs. But I would propose that the crazier absolute strength is, the less frequency and volume you can tolerate. And this is something that I never had to worry about until recently, man. I don't recover the same. I just don't. I don't think it's age. I don't think it's diet. I don't think it's anything like that. I think it's purely because the numbers that's on the bar. So if I'm benching 315 for 10, that is not the same as a novice doing 135 for 10. I don't care what anybody tells me. Even if the proximity to failure is identical, there's more stress on my joints. There's more fatigue being generated from that. I specifically noticed this when I started deadlifting in the 5s, that it wasn't like deadlifting in the 3s. Stimulus to fatigue. And the weight on the bar is an independent recovery factor. Take Julius Maddox, the strongest bencher in the world. He could only do heavy benching once every 2 weeks. Tom Platz used to squat once a month, I believe. It's what it is. Unless you're strong, you won't understand what I'm saying. So
I think this is where Mike Israetel maybe got a lot of pushback because a lot of people who couldn't relate to what he was saying about stimulus to fatigue.
Oh, he's right on about that.
Right. So I think people need to check themselves a little bit, because if you can't relate to that and you're just dissing stimulus to fatigue, like just inappropriately dissing this concept.
No.
It's because you're not there. You haven't experienced what it is that Alex is talking about, right?
I tell you, Kenny, stimulus to fatigue changed my life. And that's the biggest thing that I learned from Dr. Mike. For years, I wasn't able to put into words. I would just say more out of less weight. And I still use that terminology because it makes sense and it's fun and whatnot. But I didn't know that it had to do with the stimulus aspect. Because you can have movements that are high stimulus but low fatigue, and vice versa. Or you can have high stimulus, but it's also high fatigue. So what are you going to pick? Well, the one that has less fatigue. You don't want fatigue is not good. The more you can minimize that, the better. And this is also why I have longer rest intervals, and also why I gravitate towards low to moderate reps. Because even though reps of 30 will have the same hypertrophic outcome, it actually is more fatiguing. There's more of a chance of form degradation happening. So you can do it, absolutely. I'm not disregarding it, but gun to my head, I'm going to stick to the 6 to 10 rep range on average, instead of 15 to 20 or whatever, or 20 plus. Certainly not 20 plus.
I'll give one example where I think that might be suitable for someone who really likes that rep range, and with like a leg extension, and maybe you're doing myo reps where, you know what I mean? Like you do your first set, it's like 10 to 15, and then you take a 15-second break, and then you crank out a few extra, really close to failure, really high effort. Maybe that's where that high rep stuff can apply well. I still enjoy the heavy sets of leg extension personally.
So do I, man. I'll do reps of 10 on leg extensions, if you call that heavy.
Right.
Because the thing is, then you're just enduring the pain for longer.
Right.
Especially when it's a short and biased movement. That's the worst thing.
Yes.
To grind that out for high reps.
That buildup of sensation in your quadriceps, like it's only happening in those final few reps anyways.
Exactly.
you're putting off the inevitable, man. Like just
you're putting off the inevitable, enduring more pain, which I guess is great for the mindset, but physiologically, there's no difference when you do approach failure at the end. This is why I do good mornings, by the way, because I used to do heavy deadlifts every time I would go into the gym. It was great, equally as effective, but it killed my recovery. By switching over to the good morning, I would get the same results with 1/4 of the weight. And it's so good that now I can walk in on any given day and pull at least 6 plates without even doing the exercise, just from the carryover, because it's the same movement pattern. A good morning is a hip hinge with a bar on your back, and the deadlift is a hip hinge with a bar on your hand. You're going to get the same stimulus on your glutes, hamstrings, and lower back. The difference is the RDL is going to work your upper back, the traps, the forearms if you're not using straps. So there's more upper body involvement. So you can say there's more muscles, quote unquote, with a higher weight, obviously. And it's more specific in some respects to some pulls off the floor and whatnot. But the primary movers, which is where I'm getting at, you do an RDL for your lower body. We're not doing it to get a jacked upper body, right? It's going to be the same as a good morning. But the good morning, you're going to use way less weight. So pick one, similar stimulus, one has less fatigue.
You brought up something that sparked a thought now. You have a lot of natural bodybuilders that have preached deadlifts to be this movement that has really helped the development of their back. Do you have a similar experience with deadlifts? Maybe more so specifically deadlifts from the floor, low rack position potentially?
We've all paid our dues with that. I would say every natural bodybuilder can pull in the 500s, but after that point, there are severe diminishing returns. And if we're talking about back development, that's not just the spinal erectors, then I would say it's a terrible exercise. And we see street lifters or just calisthenics athletes who don't even deadlift at all. They only do pull-ups, and they have way better backs than naturals who deadlift 700 plus. And if you just look at the powerlifting world, let's look at the conventional pullers, which you can say is better for your back than sumo. A lot of them do not have good backs. I would venture to say, Kenny, that most of them don't have good backs. Strong conventional deadlifters who are natty in the 700s, they have premium, godly, S-tier spinal erectors, but they usually lack the width, because to build that, you got to focus on more directed movements like lat pull downs, pull-ups, etc. Show me a guy who can do 4 plates on pull-ups and he'll have a way better back than anyone who excels at deadlifts, especially if you have the right build for it. So my experience was rows and pull-ups builds a back better than deadlifts, except for the spinal erectors. You need to do a hip hinge, but that can be through a good morning.
Or even like an RDL, but that's still a deadlift, but and
the RDL, it has a better stimulus to fatigue ratio. So I'm going to pick for a bodybuilder, RDL over conventional deadlift all day, every day.
So for those who may not be aware, what do you think it is about the RDL that has a lower fatigue ratio compared to the
It's the fact that it's not dead stop from the worst possible position. You're also getting rid of the quad involvement. Those extra inches is where you have the extra knee bend, and it starts from the top. So it's top down, plus you have a stretch reflex in your hamstrings. It's a hip hinge with a bar in your hand, but it's not a deadlift. It's a Romanian deadlift, but it's not dead.
Right. I think it was Hersoviak. Are you familiar with Hersoviak?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. And this guy's back is like, and I know, again, an aspect of genetics and whatnot, but you look at what he does, like it's insane, like pull-up wise, and even like the rows
and the block pulls as well, which I have to credit to my yoke development specifically. Like I would argue that a rack pull below the knee is better than a deadlift if we're talking about back thickness.
Okay.
So if bodybuilders want to talk about building the back, then why are you getting those extra ranges of motion at the bottom, which don't benefit the back muscles per se? Well, you could say it's lower back. I'll give you that, but it's more lower back and quads. I would say stay in your active hinging range and go a little bit heavier to overload the upper back and traps, because the way it's growing is through weighted stretch anyway.
There's a percentage of bodybuilders that will say, well, this really did help my lats, but again, how do we know? I mean, you're doing
I don't see it, man. I think it's cap. I don't see guys building their lats from deadlifts. I see them building the traps and upper back, but not the lats.
Not the lats.
Or if it is very minor, they'd be fine just without it.
It's interesting because there is a small element of shoulder extension.
Of course.
And if you're doing the barbell, there's that internal rotation. So there's some shortening going on with the lat, but
there is.
It's a heavy isometric. I can make a case for it. Let's put it that way. But, and I have to give credit for some of these elite level pros. They know what they're talking about, right? It's not like these guys are rookies or nothing. But again, I see where you're going with this, and you can't just give it all the credit to the deadlift, or else why are you doing all the other stuff?
It's a good overall banger, but it's not going to specifically target what's actually going to give you the width. I think deadlifts are great for the spinal erectors. Like I said, if someone just did a reverse SSB good morning, which is a boatload of spinal erectors, right? Weighted pull-ups and a rowing variation. Let's say chest supported that's lengthen biased. I mean, your back is going to grow like crazy. You don't need to do a pull off the floor to get to a super elite level, stepping on stage with the best pros. Nice. So why do you need the conventional deadlift if you're already covered with all those? And it's going to have a better stimulus to fatigue ratio.
That's encouraging for those who think that they need to do it, but it just never really fit or jived well with their structure and just a whole bunch of factors from a fatigue standpoint, recovery standpoint. I think a lot of these guys who are also preaching it, or a few of the guys that I have in mind that have preached it, they're training 3 days a week, really high intensity type training. training. So it's not that they're in the gym 5-6 days a week. So there's an element of recovery that's catered to the fact that they're so
you want that bang for your buck out of that little intensity that you do have. That would make sense for like hitters, especially. Yeah, I could see the point there. So there's always nuance when we talk about these things, you know, but I think overlap is the biggest contributor for sure.
Absolutely.
When I would post my regular upper body workouts, guys would say, Alex, why the heck are you doing all the presses, then the pulls right after? Just split it up. And I'd be like, but it keeps me in that groove. And because the back training was just an accessory in the sense that like the primary goal was the pressing muscles, I didn't care so much if that aspect wasn't going to do as well. Once I started splitting it up, push, pull,